This is a pretty epic computer, and I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say you probably can't build this gaming PC. Now, I'm not doubting you, but what I am saying, you probably can't build this computer for the same price I did. I only paid $388.12. Now, if you can't build it for the same price, what's the point of this video? The point is to show you what you can build if you buy used computer parts. You can get some serious performance for the money like I did here. For instance, I bought the CPU for $20 and I bought the graphics card for $70. This computer handled every game I tested at 1440p. I even tested the newly released title, The First Descendant. This game is pretty unoptimized right now and it's running on Unreal Engine 5, so you know it'll be hard to run, but this computer still managed to stay above 60 FPS with pretty decent settings. I will go over all the parts of this computer and show you even more benchmarks, all after a word from our sponsor. SuperCDK is running their back to school sale, and it's perfect if you just built a new PC or you happen to flip computers as well. Instead of dropping $200 on a Windows key from Microsoft, visit SuperCDK down below and be sure to use the discount code SPLA to get 25% off. You can get Windows 11 Pro for $22 after the discount. You can get Windows 10 Pro for $17. The discount code also saves you money on other Microsoft Office products such as Office 2019. Once you're ready to check out, they accept different forms of payment. Once you get the key, activating it is so simple. Head to your orders page on SuperCDK, click Get Key, then just copy and paste it into your window activation settings, and bam, no more watermark, and you saved yourself $200. Thank you SuperCDK for sponsoring this video. Be sure to check out their back to school sale with the links in the description. So here's the completed build. I know you've already seen it, but since all the parts were basically all black, I decided to go with a pretty clean build, and I think it turned out great. Starting off this build is the CPU. For that, I'm using this i5-10400F. I normally go AMD for my budget builds because it just makes sense with their AM4 platform. But when I got this CPU on my Facebook Marketplace for only $20, I couldn't pass it up. This processor normally sells for around $50 to $70. Now, it has a really low base frequency, but you'll see later on in the benchmarks, it holds up pretty well. For our motherboard, I also bought it used, but this time it was on eBay and I paid $53.63. I picked up this Gigabyte B460M DS3H. It supports 9th generation and 10th gen Intel CPUs, has all the basics like RAM slots, M.2 slot, USB holes. I can't complain, and at least it works. And speaking of the RAM and M.2 slots, for our random access memory, actually using a 32 gigabyte kit of RAM that I bought for $47.58. It's clocked at 3200 megahertz. Now that is a solid speed, but doesn't matter much because the i5-10400F only supports up to 2666. For the single M.2 slot, I'm using a fairly budget tier M.2 SSD. It's a 1 terabyte capacity from Kingspec. It's only Gen 3, but it was $46.61 on Amazon Prime Day. I've used this drive plenty times in the past. I've never had issues, and it also comes with an M.2 screw. To finish off the motherboard and cool our CPU, I'm using this all black 120mm tower cooler from ID Cooling. I use their coolers all the time, and I normally opt for the RGB versions. They come in black and white, but I couldn't pass up on this one. I wanted a super clean look for this build, and this cooler provided that, and it was only $18. For the case, I'm using the DIY PC Cube. I opted for the version without fans. It's your pretty basic fish tank style case. Has your main compartment to hold all your good looking hardware, then you have the rear to hide all your ugly hardware. And since it had no fans, I decided to add 3 black fans from Arctic. I'm using their P12s. These are actually from an old personal build. They run great, and I actually use them as a cheaper alternatives to Noctua fans. Now, you can't have a computer build without a power supply. I'm just using a basic 600 watt 80 plus gold unit. It's in a PVIA Prestige, and I also added all black cable extensions. Okay, now for the last and most important part, the graphics card. For that, I'm going with this GT 1030. Nah, just joking. I'm using my second $70 RTX 3060. Yeah, that's right. I bought 2 of these on my Facebook Marketplace for $70 each. It was in my PC flipping series. I'm pretty sure it was in like season 1, episode something. The video will be linked below if you want to see me buy it. But yeah, $70 RTX 3060. Can't complain. Bless that old man that sold me those GPUs. I've had it sitting in my part inventory for kind of a while, and this is the perfect opportunity to use it. It's a super clean EVGA model, and this GPU sells for $220 on the used market. In my opinion, I wouldn't pay that much. I personally buy RTX 3070s at that price range, and that just goes to show you the power of buying used PC components. Now let me show you the performance, but first, one more part, just adding a simple little RGB strip. I wanted this PC to look clean, but but also have some lights for the future buyer when I end up flipping it for profit. This computer will be listed for sale on my Java page, which is linked below, as well as links to all the parts for this computer if you want to try and build it for yourself. Starting our benchmarks off, I ran a time spy and we got a total score of 8,268. I followed that up with some AAA titles. I just wanted to show you this computer can actually perform in game. I ran Cyberpunk 2077, just ran the in-game benchmark at 1440p with the ray tracing low preset. It enables DLSS and it sets it to auto, so I changed it to balanced, but I left everything else as is. With that configuration, we averaged 57 FPS with a 1% low of 45. I wanted to see if we could get above 60 FPS. I really don't care about ray tracing, so I just ran it again with the high preset, and this time it enabled AMD fidelity. With that, we were able to average 66 FPS with a 1% low of 51, and in my opinion, I still think it looked pretty good. I mean, it's at high settings, why wouldn't it? Next up is Helldivers 2. I first tried it at 1440p with the high preset. Now, we weren't quite at the 60 FPS mark, but it was still pretty playable, even in intense situations. I tried dropping to the medium preset, and we were still under that 60 FPS. And it wasn't until the low preset where we saw above 60 FPS, but the game still looked pretty good, and we averaged 77 FPS and got a 1% low of 33. All my Helldivers players, do you think this is acceptable? As I said in the intro, I also tested the First Descendant. Now, I've never played this type of shooter. They call it a looter shooter, but my first impressions, it seems pretty fun and not bad for a free game. The recommended specs aren't anything super crazy, and it looks like you can get away with some pretty old hardware, but since it is new, it's unoptimized. Luckily, this computer isn't using super old parts, and I was able to play at 1440p with the medium preset, and we were able to average 64 FPS. Okay, now for some easier to run games. First up is Rainbow Six Siege. Ran it at 1440p with the in-game benchmark. Now, this game is pretty easy to run, I'll be honest, so I ran it at the Ultra preset with max FOV, and we averaged 210 FPS with a 1% low of 120. For another fairly easy to run esports title, loaded up Apex Legends at 1440p. I had the FOV set to max, which is 110. I had TSAA on, and everything else was on high settings. I played in their mixtape mode, which is just a bunch of different modes like team deathmatch and domination, and they're all on rotation. Anyways, I was able to average 130 FPS with a 1% low of 93. Now, next up in Warzone Resurgence, I tested that game at 1440p with the Ultra preset. I also used max FOV. The render resolution was set at 1440p, but it did enable NVIDIA DLSS. I'll be honest, I'm pretty washed at this game. I haven't been playing as much, so I kind of suck. But the computer did great, and you can easily drop the settings and get more FPS. We were able to average 72 FPS and 1% low of 33. Our last easier to run game is Fortnite, except it's not so easy. I first tested at 1440p with DirectX 12, and I tried to run at high settings with TAA on. Well, it wasn't the best situation. Thanks to Fortnite for trying to be this super realistic game. It looked great, I'll be honest, but we were under 60 FPS, and when you get in an actual gunfight, it couldn't hold it steady. I then tweaked the settings. I kept it at DirectX 12, dropped all the settings to low except the view distance, and I had the 3D res scale set to 100%. With these settings, the game still looks pretty good. And the plus side, it is way more playable now. We averaged 174 FPS and a 1% low of 68. But what if you wanted more FPS? Well, you can drop down to performance mode and get a little boost. I kept all the settings the same except actually switching it to performance mode. And with that, we averaged 207 FPS and a 1% low of 27. You can see you do get a little boost in FPS, but your 1% lows will be, well, they'll be lower. I would like to hear your thoughts on this computer. I would also like to know of any awesome computers you've built buying used computer parts. Go ahead and drop those comments down below. If you want to see another used gaming PC that offers some serious value, go and click the video on screen, and I'll see you over there.